Good afternoon and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. Today, we turn our focus to one of the most urgent and devastating humanitarian crises of our time, the unfolding catastrophe in Gaza. According to the World Food Programme, nearly 470,000 people in Gaza are experiencing famine like conditions due to ongoing conflict and restricted humanitarian access. To help us unpack the scale, the challenges, and the possible path forward, we are joined by Professor Muhannad Ayyash, Professor of Sociology at Mount Royal University, whose expertise in conflict, humanitarian issues, and international governance will provide critical insights into this crisis. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Professor, how would you analyze the current scale of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and what are some of the key questions and challenges you want to raise in the context of the humanitarian and food situation that shapes the region today?
Well, I mean, this is one of the worst catastrophes that we have witnessed in recent history. This is a deliberate starvation of a people in their entirety. It's the images that we're seeing, the videos that we're seeing, the stories that we're reading are beyond our ability to even comprehend or fathom. I mean, you can't really wrap your head around this kind of suffering, both in its intensity, in its scale, in its scope. Not we're not only just talking about children and infants and adults being starved to death. I mean, people have already died as a result of starvation. Um, but we're talking about, immense humiliation. In addition to that, people's sense of dignity, sense of humanity is being put to the test in Gaza. They know that the world knows that they are being starved to death, and they are seeing that not many people, not enough people, certainly in power, are doing what needs to be done in order to alleviate that suffering. So I mean, just imagine yourself in that situation where you're watching your children starve, telling you that they're hungry and there's nothing you can do about it. You yourself are starving. You might be one of the tragically unfortunate ones who have lost a child or an infant to starvation. I mean, what would you think of the world if you were in that position? What would you think of the fact that states around the world have refused to take the necessary step in order to lift the blockade, lift the siege, and allow you to just eat? Um, we're talking about a situation where doctors are working 8-hour shifts and longer and having one small, non-nutritious meal to work those shifts. We're talking about journalists who are going hungry. Everybody's being affected. And the larger political context in which this is taking place is the Israeli plan to take out Palestinians from Gaza, is to expel them from Gaza and forcibly relocate them somewhere else so that they can claim Gaza for their own and claim it under exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty and say that this is now part of Israel. That is their long-term goal, and they are working towards it step by step. And one of these steps is to make life so unlivable for Palestinians that they just say, I give up, I surrender, I'm going to leave my land. Just take me anywhere other than here. Um, and I mean, the Palestinians have refused to say that, despite the tremendous violence that they have faced. The Palestinian people in Gaza have refused to leave their land, are still refusing that option today. And they know that a life of being refugees in whether it's in Egypt or Libya or wherever other country is being, thrown around as a potential spot for them, they know that that would not be a life that they want. Even if they have food in it, that's not the life that they want. They want to be free. They want to be sovereign people living on their own lands. And so they're, despite all of this immense violence that they're facing, they're still doing that. And the Israeli state continues, enjoying the impunity that it does, continues to push forward with their plan to empty out Gaza, take it over, and we see what that looks like in all its violence and brutality.
Yeah, so with famine looming and widespread spread malnutrition affecting children, pregnant women, and the elderly, what international policy shifts are needed to prioritize food security and medical aid in active conflict zones?
So one thing that we've seen a lot of are statements and words from countries around the world, including Canada, the UK, those 28 or so European countries and their allies, including Japan, for example, that signed that statement saying that Israel needs to do this immediately, allow all this humanitarian aid. We've seen countries in the global south release statements saying that, but words don't feed people. Statements don't stop a genocidal machine from operating. What needs to happen is shifts in policy that put material pressure on Israel. And there's only two things that you can use here to put material pressure on Israel. You either attack them militarily. Nobody really wants to do that. Nobody wants that anyway. War is not going to be a resolution to anything, but you can put serious and sustained economic pressure on the Israeli state. You have to not just say, oh, Israel needs to do better on this and that. You have to force them to do that. They have shown now for over a year and a half that they are not going to budge by being shamed into allowing humanitarian aid. You have to pressure them to do that. And how do you pressure them? You cut bilateral economic relations. You place sanctions on Israeli leaders. You make it hurt in their pockets. And if countries around the world would just do that one step, this would all end pretty much immediately. I know many people keep pointing to Trump and waiting on the US to put that kind of pressure on Israel. The US has so much influence and leverage over Israel that all they have to do, they don't even have to take that step of economic isolation. They can just threaten it. If they threaten the Israelis with it, Israel would stop tomorrow. I understand that. But the problem is that the American administration under Trump and under Biden, the American government under both those administrations, I mean, were active participants in the genocide of the Palestinian people. They were active participants in the denial of humanitarian aid arriving for Palestinians. So they are part of the problem. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the world is helpless. Countries around the world can take their own set of actions. They can get together, form coalition to stop the Israeli state, announce sanctions on Israel, cut economic ties, cut political ties, and that would generate enough pressure on both Israel and the U.S. to stop this madness, to stop this brutality, and allow the people of Gaza to live a dignified life. But what is needed right now is an enormous amount of aid to be delivered by real professionals, not the Gaza so-called humanitarian fund. Nothing humanitarian about that fund. Um, we're talking about real professionals from United Nations agencies, UNRWA, administering the delivery of aid. They know how to do it. They do it in a dignified way. They do it in an effective way. They do it without killing people, the way that the Americans and the Israelis are doing with their so-called humanitarian fund. What is needed is for countries around the world to step forward, place pressure on Israel, economic pressure, political pressure, and force them to open up the borders, allow unlimited amounts of humanitarian aid to come in, and allow real professionals to administer it.
Yeah, so you talked about humanitarian aid. So, should humanitarian corridors be internationally governed or protected under a new treaty mechanism to ensure aid delivery in crises like Gaza?
Oh, absolutely. And all of these, infrastructure, all the infrastructure needed for that is kind of already there, based on the past experience of UNRWA and other UN agencies. Right now, they've quote unquote eased off, the blockade, and they've announced these quote unquote humanitarian pauses. But there's no safe humanitarian corridor for the delivery of aid. There's no guarantees for the safety of the staff to administer the aid. They're also limiting what kind of aid comes in and how much of it comes in, immensely limiting it. Gaza right now needs at minimum 500 to 600 trucks a day. So far, I think they haven't even broken 100, if I'm not mistaken, if that. And there's no safe corridor. Of course, the first few trucks were going to be looted. People are starving to death. They're going to loot whatever they can get their hands on right away. This is a population that has gone through an experience that very few of us can comprehend. So you need unlimited aid, just like we saw during the very brief ceasefire back in January, February. The UN was able to administer that aid through safe corridors and so on. Ultimately, obviously, this kind of thing is just a first step towards alleviating suffering. It does not offer a final solution to the core of the issue, but this is what we need immediately.
Yeah, and now coming to the roles of multilateral organizations like the UN. So, what role should UN as well as other regional powers play in enforcing ceasefires and supporting post-conflict recovery and supporting Gaza with humanitarian aid on a very urgent basis?
Yeah, so it's difficult to talk about a post-conflict recovery when we're still in the thick of a genocidal operation, and the Israeli government has made it clear that they have no interest in ending it. That their idea of the end of this will only come about when there's basically no longer a Palestinian governance structure remaining in Gaza, and that only a small number of the Palestinians would remain there, that the majority would be expelled and turned into refugees in other parts of the world. This is still what they say is their plan. The U.S., Trump has never backed off his idea of taking, quote unquote, taking over Gaza. This is still what they are trying to operationalize. So when you're facing that kind of political force, you have to oppose it with force. And like I said, you do that militarily, but you can also do that economically. So, what the United Nations needs to do right now is to place economic pressure on Israel. There's no other way. It's possible to get these brief pauses that we're seeing right now. It's possible to get even a ceasefire like the one we saw in January, February for a small, limited amount of time. A ceasefire that Israel violated, by the way, continuously and almost on a daily basis. And yes, those would be better than what we're seeing right now. But that's not a long-term solution. To arrive at a long-term solution, you have to force Israel to do it. What people have to understand is that um, this is not a symmetrical warfare. This is not a symmetrical conflict. Israel holds all the power. They have the military power, they have the economic power, they have the political power over the Palestinians. They are looking at the situation and going, if I am this much more powerful than the Palestinians, why would I give them anything? I can just take everything that I want through force. And I can do it through various strategies and tactics that can last decades even. Like they think they have time. They can just slowly achieve their objectives of creating what they call Greater Israel from the river to the sea. So they've already said no to the two-state solution. It's not that they just oppose Hamas, they oppose even the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They believe that 60% of the West Bank should be officially annexed by the Israeli state soon. They believe that a good percentage of Area B, so 60% is what they call Area C of the West Bank. Area B, these area names come from the Oslo Accords. Area B is where Palestinians have even less, the Palestinian Authority even has less influence um, than what they do in Area A. But the Israelis want to even annex parts of Area B, and they're doing that through settlement expansion and stealing of land, taking resources, and so on. Essentially, they're limiting the Palestinian Authority now to limited self-governance in just 18% of the West Bank. That's it. You can't negotiate with a power that thinks this is a quote unquote solution. So, the Saudi Arabia and France can have their conference all they want about the two-state solution and all of the rest of it. But if you don't put pressure on Israel, they're going to continue to think that they have no reason to stay off the path that they're on. And the Palestinian people are not powerful enough in terms of militarily and politically and economically to be able to negotiate with the Israelis where the Israelis negotiate back in good faith. We are not in a situation where that is possible. So Palestinians need other countries around the world to step forward and say, well, this isn't right. What the Israeli state wants is not right. If the international community actually believes in a two-state solution, where the Palestinian images on just 22% of historic Palestine, that includes the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, that would just be only 22% of historic Palestine. Then if that is what the international community wants or says that it stands for, then they even for just that, for that 22% of historic Palestine, they have to put economic sanctions on Israel to make them accept that. Otherwise, they will not. The International Court of Justice ruled on that last year. It agreed with the case being brought forward by many countries from the global south, including the PA, that Israel was actively, through policy and practices and actions, actively preventing the possibility, let alone the appearance, of a Palestinian state. So, we can't just keep saying the same things like, oh, we support a two-state solution without action behind it. If you really mean that, then you have to force Israel to do it. And how do you force them? Like I said, economic sanctions. You have to raise the price of settler colonial occupation. If you don't, they're going to continue to do what they're doing today until they achieve their goal of greater Israel.
Yeah, so when you talk about economic sanctions, what exactly are you looking forward to? Are you looking forward to a sanctions with a type of sanctions which United States put on Russia in case of the Ukraine war? What sanctions exactly are you looking forward to in terms of economic aspects of it?
So for me, what should happen is, in fact, a severing of all economic ties. So you don't do any trade whatsoever with the Israeli state. You don't. You start to sanction individuals. You start to sanction if companies do business with the Israeli state. You start to sanction them. You basically make it so that no company or institution around the world would want to do business with the Israeli state. No more trade, no more cooperation. Um, you expel expel their ambassador from your country. This is the type of isolation that is needed. Now, that would be the ideal situation that would place so much pressure on Israel. It would come to the table immediately. But I know in realpolitik, that's not going to happen like that. So there are degrees of sanctions that would also get us there. It would just take a lot longer and with not as great results. You could do a weapons embargo, for example. No more weapons sales. You don't import weapons to Israel. You don't export weapons. You don't import from Israel. You don't export to Israel, at least in the weapons sector. Um, I mean, if countries want to just focus on that as a first step, I would welcome that. It would be a step in the right direction. I don't know if, I doubt that the US would participate in anything like this. So I don't know if Israel would, come to the table immediately from seeing something like this, but it would make them worried enough that they might. Because they would be worried about, well, okay, so if they do an arms embargo, I mean, that's a good chunk of money that they'll lose, but something that they could probably weather that storm for a period of time anyway. But if they think, okay, well, we can get away with that, we keep doing what we're doing. But on the other hand, there's also be voices within Israel that would say, well, if we keep what we're doing in response to that, then what's next? What sector are they going to do that to next? And then they become to fear that, and that might bring them to the negotiating table. You see what I'm saying? So it depends on the effectiveness of sanctions is tied to how far you're willing to go. In the ideal situation that I stated, where you say, you know what, this bilateral agreement that we had, our entire trade agreement is canceled, and we're not going to do another one with Israel. If you start to go to that route, then you're really going to put enormous pressure on them. And Israeli society itself would be the first to rise up against their own government, and they would have a real reckoning and real rethinking of their path. So this is what is really needed, because some of these limited sanctions that we see today, for example, against um, even against ministers like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, against a settler group, an extremist settler group, or extremist settlers, those have very limited effects. You need to target the state structure of the Israeli state with economic sanctions that would bring fruitful results. Essentially, again, what the message that Israelis will receive from the world is the path that you're on is unacceptable. And there are going to be consequences that you're going to feel on a daily basis. That would encourage change in behavior. I mean, that's the whole point of sanctions, is to encourage change in behavior. Now, a country like Israel would not be able to weather a strong sanctions regime the way that maybe Russia can. They're not as big. Russia is a huge country. There are other as well big countries that they can have relations with to weather the Western sanctions. They still hurt them, but like they can survive them. They can still continue. Israel would not be as easily, or well, not easily, but would not have as much capability as a Russia, let's say, for weathering a strong sanctions regime. And if it is the ideal one that I stated, it wouldn't. Could not possibly weather that one, and they would come to their senses. So yeah, so in my answer, I'm going to give you the ideal one, but I understand that there's a spectrum on that. Others can be effective as well, but how effective they are going to be will depend on how strong the sanctions regime is.
Yeah, so you talked about political will as well. So, to what extent is the current international humanitarian aid system dependent on political will, and what structural reforms are needed to make it more autonomous and agile and impactful in conflict zones in Gaza?
I mean, I think in the current way that the world operates, I don't think you can make those structures independent of the political context. Unfortunately, humanitarian aid and the delivery of humanitarian aid and that kind of infrastructure is still very much dependent on the political context, for the simple reason that it needs money. It needs money to operate, and it needs safety to operate in. If the political context prevents both of those things, then they're not going to be able to just operate autonomously. And I don't see right now any sort of any opening in the current configuration of the system that allows it to become entirely autonomous. Obviously, you cannot deliver aid into an area that is being, flattened to the ground by the Israeli state. Like it's not safe. So you have to get agreement from the Israeli state to allow you in, or you can't just bring the aid in regardless of what Israel thinks, because well, they've got the whole thing blockaded. You can't physically penetrate through those siege the siege of the Gaza Strip. So you do need a political will and political work being done in order to enable the arrival of humanitarian aid in Gaza and its proper administration. So I'm not sure how you can reform that in the current system, because it is so dependent on, like I said, funding and the ability to enforce decisions through military force. And both of those things don't exist equally across the political spectrum or across the world. Um, and therefore, political work is needed in order to assure that
Yeah,
for the
and
time
how
being.
Yeah, and how do you analyze the role of other Gulf states in this whole conflict? And finally, what do you see as the way forward for the broader Israel-Palestine situation?
So the Gulf states have not done anything resembling enough. and in fact, some of them are acting against the interests of the Palestinian people, such as the United Arab Emirates, um, who have at least flirted with the idea, the Trump plan to evacuate, quote unquote, evacuate or empty out Gaza. Um, Saudi Arabia, like I said, they're organizing this conference with France. I believe it's either happening today or tomorrow. And they're, making statements that sound good on paper, but they're not putting action behind it. Words of sympathy, of support. Palestinians, we could fill an entire huge library with statements coming from the Arab countries and from around the world expressing sympathy and support for us. We don't need any more. That library is full. We need action. And the Gulf states, the Arab states in general, have not done anything resembling enough. They could lead the effort to isolate the Israeli state economically. They choose not to. Egypt, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco have not stopped their normalization with Israel. The very least those countries could do is to cancel all their agreements with Israel, to say that they are no longer recognizing Israel and they're no longer normalizing relations with it. But they choose not to do that. Um, so Others like Saudi Arabia have not put nearly enough pressure on the Americans to force Israel to make changes. So they have failed. They have failed this moment in history, and there's a lot of disappointment, shame, and anger towards those regimes in the Arab world. Many people feel all of those three things. And Some of them are able to vocalize it. Some of them are too, afraid to do so in public, but they will share those things with you in private. They're afraid of saying these things out loud because of the enormous repression and violence that those regimes can unleash on their own population. So, these tensions, though, are not going to just go away. People don't watch the brutality of genocide unfolding on their phone screens and then just forget about it next year. This is what the Israeli state, the Americans, um, and some of these regimes believe will happen. That whenever this is over, and I don't know when that will be and what kind of finality it will have, that eventually they can, change the direction of the public discourse and people will just forget it and move on to the next thing. But I don't think it's that simple. I think people will remember who did what and who didn't do what during this time. I think when massive transformations are happening in the region, which I don't see how that will not happen eventually. It could be 30 years from now, but eventually there will be massive transformations because people cannot be subdued for this long and not fight back and not demand change. And I think when those changes happen, that the genocide in Gaza will be a rallying cry for people. That they will go back to this moment to remind people why change needs to happen in these regimes. So we'll see how all that plays out. But the prospects of what good, honest people would understand as peace and justice in Palestine and Israel, it's not looking good in the short term or immediate future. Um, I believe that we're heading towards the path of more genocide, more violence, more and bigger prospects for bigger wars, regional wars. I think, unfortunately, we are on this path. There doesn't seem to be enough of a political will on the global stage to put enough pressure on Israel to change directions from that path. People continue still to equivocate on these things. a Canadian diplomat just said, "Oh, yes, Israel needs to be pressured, but so does Hamas," as if Hamas has a whole lot of cards to play at this point, or the Palestinian Authority as if they need to be pressured into accepting crumbs. I mean, at this point, the Palestinian Authority is willing to accept crumbs as a quote unquote deal. Um, uh, uh, so, the pressure needs to be on the powerful side here, which is Israel. And unless that happens, we will continue down a very dark path of instability, chaos, genocide, and war. And that will have ripple effects, not just in the region, but beyond it as well, as this is obviously a very important economic region because of the energy sector. So, unless people take a different path here, I'm afraid we're heading towards more suffering, which will be largely experienced by the Palestinian people in the near future and in the intermediate future as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Ayash, for sharing your invaluable insights on this urgent and complex crisis. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is there, and your analysis helps us understand not only the immediate challenges, but the broader implications for international policy and humanitarian action. Appreciate you joining here on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.